Super Mario World had a lot of unused content, and some of it is still hidden dormant in the game's ROM. A lot of the old code just gets skipped right over and can never be executed. However, some of it can still be triggered under the right circumstances, usually with the help of some bugs or glitches. In this video, we'll take a look at a couple of concepts that ended up being scrapped, but an empty shell of their remains can be found in the game's code. Retro Game Mechanics Explained is brought to you by its YouTube members, Patreon supporters, and viewers like you. Thank you. Let's start with the fun mechanic of bringing a carryable item across the end-level goal tape. When you do this, the item turns into a power-up for Mario to collect, a nice little bonus. The exact item it turns into depends on Mario's current power status itself. If you're small or big Mario, the item will turn into a super mushroom. If you're caped Mario, the item will be a cape feather, and if you're fire Mario, the item will be a fire flower. But there's also two special cases. The first is that if you already have the power-up that you would get in your reserve box, you'll get a 1-up instead. So big Mario with a mushroom, cape Mario with a feather, fire Mario with a flower. The second special case is if that item you're carrying is a key or Baby Yoshi. These two items will always give you a 1-up no matter what. We can make a chart that shows what power-up item you'd get depending on Mario's power-up status along the top and the item being carried along the left. A key or Baby Yoshi gives a 1-up no matter what, and any other item would give a mushroom, feather, flower. Just keep in mind that if the item received matches what's already in the item box, then the item upgrades into a 1-up. To any casual player, this is the extent of the chart. However, in the game's code, this chart is over 3 times as big, with 3 extra Mario statuses and 2 additional checks for the item being carried. Let's go through these one by one. The carried item check is really simple. First, the key and Baby Yoshi items are checked for individually. In the final game, they both give a 1-up, but since they're checked separately, technically they could give different items. Secondly, the springboard and P-switch are also checked for as a group. Again, in the final game, these are treated the same as the remaining carryable items, such as Koopa shells, throw blocks, bob-ombs, etc. So they still give the mushroom, feather, flower. Now for the additional Mario statuses. The 5th status is if Mario currently has star power when hitting the goal tape. Technically, this check is still in the game fully functional. It's just that before the check for star power happens, the moment Mario hits the goal tape, his invincibility is removed. So he never actually has star power the moment is checked for here. If this were to succeed though, Mario would get a superstar item. This gives Mario invincibility for the remaining of the end level cutscene, which doesn't seem too useful. I'll come back to this. Unless the item were a key or Baby Yoshi, of course, in which you would get a 1-up mushroom. But this 1-up mushroom would give you 2 lives instead of 1. The 6th status is if Mario is currently riding Yoshi. This will always give you a standard 1-up mushroom no matter what. This check is also still in the game fully functional, it's just that normally you can't pick up an item while riding Yoshi. This doesn't check if Yoshi's holding an item in his mouth, just if Mario's holding one. However, with the correct positioning, you can actually grab an item and mount Yoshi on the same frame, which will allow Mario to carry the item while on Yoshi's back. And sure enough, if you hit the goal tape while doing this, you'll get a 1-up no matter what. The 7th status is entirely unused and isn't referenced anywhere in the final game's code. The entries in this table suggest that these would have all also given 1-ups. However, they would give a different number of lives. A standard carryable item would have been a normal 1-up, a springboard or P-switch would give 2 lives, a key would give 3 lives, and a Baby Yoshi would, well, we'll come back to that later. Okay, back to the Superstar. In addition to giving Mario invincibility for the 10 seconds or so during the cutscene, Transforming the carryable item into a star triggers a sort of star power counter. There's a single 8-bit byte that holds this counter, and by doing this it goes from 0 to 1. Every time a level or sublevel is loaded, this counter is shifted left once. This makes that 1 bit that got set from the star move to the left 1 position in the byte. Once this bit makes its way to the most significant bit on the left, after entering 7 levels or rooms, Mario will instantly start that room with invincibility. Then the entire counter is cleared, so you can't queue up multiple star powers. I think the idea behind this mechanic was that you could get the star power from the star item for the duration of the cutscene, but it may have stuck around on the world map, sort of like how you can give yourself star power in Super Mario Bros. 3. Then you would enter the next level with invincibility right away. I'm not exactly sure why there's the delay of 7 level entries before it triggers though. By the way, you can totally still get this to happen in the final release of the game. By utilizing a glitch called power-up incrementation, I'll leave a link to a really old video of mine that explains it, you can get Mario's power-up status to be out-of-bounds values that are not small, big, cape, or fire. Looking at the chart we made, if small Mario is 0, big Mario is 1, cape Mario is 2, and fire Mario is 3, if somehow Mario were to have power-up status 4, whatever glitch status that may be, the game would use the star power entry in the table, even when Mario doesn't have star power. Now, due to other side effects of being a glitched power-up status, this superstar will make Mario cape Mario, but it still triggers the star power counter. So if you enter 7 more levels, you'll start with invincibility. Let's look at this chart again. This chart exists in the game's code, and each entry is a single byte. Normally, the byte corresponds to the exact sprite number that will be spawned from the carryable item at the goal tape. Mushrooms have ID hex 74, feathers are 77, flowers are 75, and stars are 76. 1-up mushrooms have ID hex 78, but for all of these 1-up spots in the table, a different value is used. In fact, there are 2 different values, hex E0 and F0. Now, in the final game, these 2 values end up doing the exact same thing. It's a case of, if the value is hex E0, use this sprite, else if the value is hex F0, use the same thing. They're both explicitly checked for individually, but they perform identically, that being a 1-up being spawned. However, the values aren't exactly just hex E0 and F0. The top half of the byte is what is checked for, the hex E and F. The bottom half of the byte defines how many lives this 1-up actually gives you. This is how the star power with Key and Baby Yoshi are able to give 2 lives. These 2 entries in the table are both hex F1. The being on Yoshi column is full of the value hex E0. So 0 means give 1 life, 1 means give 2 lives. The Key row is full of the value hex F0, while the Baby Yoshi row is full of the value hex E0. This is why the Key and Baby Yoshi were checked for individually. Had the hex E and F values done something differently, these 2 items would have produced different results. Now, what are the values in this final unused column? These are hex F0, F1, F2, and E4, respectively, for the 4 rows. The first 3 values result in a 1-up mushroom giving 1, 2, and 3 lives. Does the Baby Yoshi unused value produce a 1-up mushroom that gives 5 lives? Nope, it gives you 5 coins instead. As a segue into the second unused mechanic, let's look at a fun glitch that's super easy to do. Everyone knows that if you stomp on enemies consecutively, you get more and more points with each bounce. And eventually, after 8,000 points, you get 1-ups. However, there's a particular enemy in this game that doesn't abide by this limitation, that being the Wiggler. When stomping on a Wiggler, you can get 8,000 points, 1-up, 2-up, 3-up, and more. After this, you'll start hitting glitched icons, since the game only intended the 3-up to be the highest bonus to give at any time, collecting a 3-up moon. After the 3-up is the 5-up, but after that, you'll start getting coins and points. Lots of points. What in the world is going on here? The little icons that appear when collecting points or lives are handled by the same system in the game. They're commonly known just as score sprites, but they handle points, lives, as well as coins, which went unused in the final game. There are 21 different score sprites in the game, with IDs 1 through 21. ID 0 isn't used here since it corresponds to the absence of a sprite. IDs 1 through 12 are the score sprites that actually correspond to points. They start at 10 and go to 20, 40, 80, 100, 200, 400, 800, 1,000, 2,000, 4,000, and finally 8,000. Only the score sprites at 100 onward are commonly used, though 10 is used for collecting coins out of blocks. The score sprites with IDs 13 through 16 correspond to lives. They go 1-up, 2-up, 3-up, then skip straight to 5-up. The 1-up sprite is red, 2-up is yellow, and 3-up is blue, but the 5-up is unused. Because of this, it has a glitched sprite, which I'll touch on later. Finally, the score sprites with IDs 17 through 21 correspond to coins. These would have given 5, 10, 15, 20, and 25 coins each. These also have glitched sprites, but that's because their original graphics ended up getting overwritten during development. There is a counter in the game that keeps track of how many enemies have been consecutively bounced on. This counter has no limit and will eventually wrap around if you manage to hit 256 enemies in a row. Almost all enemies use a common subroutine when they are hit. This routine increments this counter, plays the proper bounce sound effect, and spawns in the proper score sprite depending on how big the value of this counter is. For example, on the first hit, the counter is increased from 0 to 1, and score sprite number 6 is displayed, corresponding to 200 points. When the counter reaches 8, score sprite number 13 is displayed, the 1-up. This routine knows to stop here. Even if the counter goes above 8, it won't try to display any score sprite with ID higher than number 13. However, there are 2 enemies in the game that don't use this common routine. The first of which is Rex, which just uses a copy-pasted version of the routine instead of calling the routine itself. The only flaw of this implementation is that when you get a 1-up from bouncing off of a Rex, only the 1-up sound plays instead of being accompanied by the bounce sound. The second of which is Wiggler, which completely fails to cap the score sprite at ID number 13. This means that you can go past the 1-up, continue to get 2-up, 3-up, 5-up, and eventually run into the unused coin sprites. And even further, after the 5 coin score sprites, the ID is still uncapped, so the game will continue to try to display score sprites with IDs higher than 21, which results in glitched coin and score amounts being given. Let's look at these score sprites in more detail. There are 7 tables in the game's ROM that correspond to the score sprites. The first 2 of which define the 2 8x8 tiles that appear on screen for this sprite. There are 22 entries in the tables, 1 for each score sprite ID, as well as an entry for 0, which goes unused. For example, the first real entries for score sprite number 1 are tiles hex 8-3 and 4-4. That would be this blank tile and this 10 tile, which would display 10 points. These go in order for all of the score sprites, 1-up sprites, and eventually the coin sprites, which show up glitched since their graphics don't exist anymore. However, if we go back in time, we can see that in a previous iteration of this graphics file, the coin sprites did indeed exist at exactly these locations. When the score sprite ID is number 17 or higher, a coin sprite, an additional 8x8 tile is shown, which was supposed to be this little coin. The next 2 tables define exactly how many points each score sprite awards. There are 17 entries in these tables, 12 for the 12 actual score sprites, 4 for the 1-up sprites, and an empty slot for 0 again. The coin sprites just don't have entries in these tables since they supposedly don't award points. I'm sure this won't come up again later. The 1-up sprites also don't award points, but they do have entries in these tables that are just zeros for some reason. The score sprites all define their amount of points divided by 10, so, for example, the 10-point icon only gives 1 point. This is just how the score is stored internally. The trailing 0 in the status bar is purely graphical. The last 3 tables are pretty small and are only used by subsets of the score sprites. One of them just lists how many lives each of the 4 1-up sprites give. 1, 2, 3, 5. The next table just lists how many coins each of the 5 coin sprites give. 5, 10, 15, 20, 25. I'm sure these 2 tables could have been combined with the scoring table somehow, since the 1-up and coin sprites don't use the score at all, but that's just how it was coded here. The last table is interesting and was only meant to be used by 2 sprites, the 2-up and the 3-up. By default, all of the score sprites use a graphical attribute value of hex 08. This makes the object tiles use the red palette by default. This small table has 2 bytes, 4 and 6. If the ID of the score sprite is number 14 or greater, the value in this table overrides the default 8 value. This is what makes the 2-up yellow and the 3-up blue. So now for the fun part, where I explain why everything is broken. Now, I call it broken, but really it's just half implemented and was never meant to be fully seen in the end. The only way to see these out-of-bounds score sprites is with this wiggler bouncing trick, managing to get a ton of enemies to follow you to the goal tape when you hit it at the end of the level, or using glitched power-up states to spawn in that 1-up with a glitched value at the goal tape. The first thing that's wrong is the missing graphics for the coin score sprites. These eventually got overwritten, so this is what they look like in the final game. Secondly, the graphical attribute value applies to more than just the 2-up and 3-up. Since the game only checks if the ID is 14 or greater, this means even score sprites with IDs 16 and higher will get the default 08 attribute value overwritten as well. This table only defines bytes for the 2-up and 3-up, so all the other score sprites afterwards index this table out of bounds and start reading garbage data. In addition to palette data, the graphical attribute byte is also responsible for layer priority, horizontal and vertical flipping, as well as determining which graphical page the tile comes from. This really mangles the graphics, and even the 5-up doesn't show up correctly because of this. Thirdly, the coin sprites are specifically coded in to also give points. This is due to a branch instruction that never got updated properly after the coin sprites were officially deprecated. However, this means that the point value tables do end up getting indexed out of bounds after all, and that activating a coin sprite will also award a glitched number of points as well. For example, the 5 coin sprite will also give 7,680 points, the 10 coin sprite gives 2,560 points, the 15 and 20 coin sprites give no points, while the 25 coin sprite gives a whopping 450,560 points. And finally, the biggest thing of all, there is no cap on the score sprite ID at all. Any score sprite with an ID greater than 21 is treated like a coin sprite, so it will award a glitched number of coins and a glitched number of points. All of the tables we've looked at, aside from the lives given from the 1-up sprites, get indexed out of bounds. So the sprites will look glitched while giving wildly different amounts of coins and points with each wiggler hit. It is not difficult at all to keep this up and max out your lives and score in just one visit to Forest of Illusion 1 using this glitch. In fact, you only need to stomp on 48 wigglers in a row to max out the score counter in the status bar. Thanks again for watching. As usual, if you would like to support the channel, you can become a channel member or Patreon supporter. As a supporter, you can get extra perks, in addition to having your name show up here, such as early access to videos and behind-the-scenes content. I've recently started sharing my notes and some media resources, such as uncut versions of my voiceovers. Even if you don't support monetarily, I still appreciate every view and share I get, so thank you for your contributions.